Hello, welcome to our Friday Transportation Seminar. Few instructions I always have to remind you, and particularly since we're in a new room today. If you're going to ask a question, you need to flip the little switch on the base of the microphone and keep holding it in either direction while you're speaking so that your question is recorded so the people out in webland can hear it, but also it's archived. And so people in the future can hear the questions and the answers. I am going to introduce Mary Gray. She's an environmental program specialist for the Federal Highway Administration, and she's going to be talking about wildlife and highways today. And I will turn it over. You're going to start with a video first, I believe, and then her talk. Thanks.
Hi, thanks for coming. I was lucky enough to be part of an international scan tour in 2001, right after our wonderful 9/11. So actually my greeting in Europe was quite fabulous. I don't think it would be so pleasant now. But anyway, we visited 5 countries in 15 days, and we're looking at how the Europeans are addressing the interactions of highways and wildlife. And the Humane Society, Susan Haygood, who was on the international scan tour with us, the scan tour had members of the Federal Highway Administration, members of AASHTO. Do you guys know what that means? The American Association of State Highways. So there are state DOT personnel. There was Forest Service, Park Service. It was quite a variety of people. And the Humane Society made this video. It kind of summarizes our scan tour, and then I have some more information on why we need to worry about the interface of wildlife and highways after the video's through. If this works. No? Doesn't. Okay. You know how to make it work? What did I do?
I'm guessing it just...
Double click? Oh, you know the magic button. I shouldn't have listened. No? I thought he said double click over here.
Try it.
Okay.
Federal Highways has an environmental policy to protect and enhance the environment, and if we're busy killing animals on our roadways, we're not doing a very good job of that.
We want to make sure that not only are wildlife not killed on our highways and cause safety problems, but also that they can range as they need to across the habitat that they need to have access to.
The projection is we have 20 years, or we will lose our ability to have a connectivity with wildlife. And I think that's something very important for us to realize, is that Europe lost it, came very close to losing it, so they are running fast to save what they have. I think the recognition that we need to be running a lot faster and doing a lot more.
For years, endangered Florida panthers routinely died along this remote stretch of highway. But because of passageways like this, which funnel wildlife beneath traffic, the carnage has stopped. Florida's panthers and a diverse variety of other animals are sidestepping their likely fate as yet more roadkill. On another Florida road, this specially designed underpass has helped dramatically reduce collisions with black bears. And in Colorado and other states, innovative strategies are addressing a problem so increasingly commonplace that motorists no longer seem to notice it. But despite such efforts, the U.S. lags behind its European counterparts.
I think the big difference in Europe versus the United States is their awareness of the need to protect the habitat and to provide crossings for animals. I think it's much more ingrained in Europe, and that's what we need to build here.
So an American delegation toured Germany and 4 other European nations in search of ways to make roadways more wildlife friendly.
We are approaching another so-called green bridge.
A lot of what we're looking at is what they call passages or green bridges, structures that were built not for cars but for animals to cross highways. In the U.S. we have, I think, 3. In Europe there are hundreds. And so we were fascinated that it's much more integral part of their highway system than it is here. From the roadway, if you're driving along, what you'll see is a normal bridge structure landscaped. And some of them have wood protection on the sides to keep out light and sound. Others are just densely landscaped. Depending on the green bridge, some the vegetation is designed for particular species, like they'll want to encourage butterflies, birds, other species to utilize it. So it will be landscaped to get that effect. Others, they just allow them to be natural and to almost vegetate to what's on either side of the bridge.
This green bridge in Switzerland connects habitat fragmented by fencing and a 6-lane highway. The landscaping was designed for use by everything from butterflies and amphibians to deer and carnivores. There are hedges and fruiting shrubs, a pond, and even wetlands. Using infrared cameras, the Swiss have documented and observed the behavior of animals using overpasses. France pioneered green bridges some 30 years ago. This one, built in conjunction with a new highway, incorporates a wooden barrier to shield wildlife from sound and headlights. Other features include mesh fences for amphibians and 2 ponds, one designed to attract wild boar and the other built to replace one destroyed by the highway.
This is an overpass on the A1 under construction. Should be similar to the one we just saw, but slightly wider.
As soon as they had the dirt on the bridge, animals were using it, so it kind of documented what Slovenia found. If you provide the connectivity and you have the wildlife on either side, they'll be using the bridges.
Brown bears still roam Slovenia's heavily forested habitat. Wildlife officials are attempting to increase habitat by establishing connectivity to the forests of Italy and other neighboring countries. Slovenia is also attempting to maximize the use of existing underpasses originally built for cars.
All the underpasses along this section of the road are very seldom used for ordinary traffic, so they're pretty much abandoned, so wildlife can use them, and it really does.
And was monitored using the sand patch to determine wildlife use. There was also a fence constructed with electrical top wires to direct wildlife into the underpass and away from the highway.
But without connectivity, there are obvious consequences.
This is a railroad which borders a 4-lane high-speed highway in brown bear habitat. Virtually impenetrable, the Slovenes hope to convince Parliament to allocate funding to build an overpass, a vegetated overpass, that will allow the animals to go back and forth.
In the Netherlands, only small fragments of wildlife habitat remain. They are protecting and connecting what land is left.
This is one of 6 or 7 culverts under this 4-lane highway used by badgers, foxes, hares, small mammals, mice.
The Netherlands built an extensive network of 600 badger tunnels, and they are retrofitting numerous bridges like this one with a shelf for mammals.
That the amphibian fences are directly attached to it.
Germany has undertaken more than 100 projects to protect amphibians. This underpass has a wall to guide salamanders to safety.
This amphibian fence is not yet finished. It will be filled in with earth so that the amphibians are directed directly around the metal barrier.
They had lots and lots of culverts for amphibians. That isn't a major concern in this country, or hasn't been. So we saw a lot of that. They went from inexpensive fencing to very expensive, specially designed concrete structures. And that's what we were trying to get a handle on, and what our options are for preserving and protecting different species, and we saw that while we were over there.
it really blew me away at what they have done there, the kinds of routine measures that they put in place to enable wildlife to cross under or over highways or to prevent them from getting onto the highways. It's second nature for the transportation agencies in Europe to design their highways to accommodate the wildlife and help preserve the wildlife habitat. There were all kinds of technologies, research information, and ideas that we got from the European trip. Several of the people who are participating in the scan within state DOTs, Dave Scott from Vermont Agency on Transportation came away really enthusiastic about this, and he's taking it back to Vermont and applying it there with a passage in the Missisquoi area.
This stretch of road connects Interstate 87 in New York with Interstate 89 in Vermont. It runs through the Missisquoi Bay National Wildlife Refuge, so it's a very environmentally sensitive area.
This is probably the most important and critical wetland complex in the entire state. It's kind of the crown and the wetland jewels of Vermont. It's a really important area to migratory birds. There are a number of state-listed threatened and endangered species that use this area. We've got the road that's gone right through the middle of this area since the late 30s. We've documented a number of deer kills, muskrats, lots of birds, surprisingly, owls, waterfowl that somehow get hit by vehicles going through the area.
Well, we're going to move the road a little to the south here, off the existing alignment, and we'll be constructing a 500-foot dry span bridge. So the road will taper up, the approach to the bridge will taper up, and will achieve a height of 10 feet above the ground level. When the bridge is in place, we'll remove this existing piece of road here that you can see it's elevated and in fact acts as a dam from the river over here, from the flooding and the natural water movement for the wetlands over. And the bridge will provide the animals that move along the river corridor a crossing point into the rest of the refuge on the south side. We were nervous about building a large structure if it wasn't going to perform as advertised or as expected. There's nothing in the Northeast or throughout most of the United States to compare it to or what it would mean. Certainly the Europeans, with their research and their history of it, we were able to see that these structures really do work as proposed and provide the benefits. So coming back from Europe, I was convinced that this being a very environmentally sensitive area, it was the right area within the state to do our first crossing.
Passageways for animals will become routine when the state DOT staff realize why it's important, realize the American public supports it, and realize that there are good techniques to do it, things that have been tested in Europe and in other states here in the United States. If we can do this right, protect the habitat and provide wildlife passages, everybody has something to gain, including the state DOTs, because they face a lot of costs in dealing with the animals that are killed along the highways and potential liability issues. So they're a big winner if we can do a good job by habitat protection and wildlife passages. And of course the American public benefits because it's safer for them to use our highways and we've got a better environment.
Advertisement for society. A wild mouse. Close it or not? Okay, who knows how to work this?
Appears to be pretty sensitive. And then you want this.
Before I get started in this presentation, I did bring copies of the report from the International Scan Tour. I didn't know how many of you there were, but if there, I do have more. So if somebody wants one, there are only 5. You can let me know, and I'll get you some more.
Okay.
Are there any questions from the video, or should I just go ahead with the rest of the presentation? Yes.
Where's your microphone, Shana?
I was curious whether some of these overcrossings or undercrossings are combined with, or can be made more palatable with, like, combining with human uses, like if there are trails in the area that it can become kind of a combined human and wildlife trail.
Yeah, unlike the United States and most of the countries we visited, it's not so private property oriented. So where most of the green bridges, passages, or the variety of names they have, they are used by pedestrians, bicyclists, farm equipment, so most of them are multi-use, even though a lot of the biologists in this country believe that degrades the quality of the connectivity. We didn't see it over there. So it's just a totally different approach than what we have here. I'm not giving my straight European Scan Tour presentation to you guys because I wanted to give you some background on what we need to do if we're ever going to have the type of connectivity that Europe is kind of ahead of us on. We did this report, and it went into some more of the detail on laws, regulations, and those kinds of things that can help us have that kind of interaction. Most people think of the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, as the one and only, or the Endangered Species Act as what will help us do this. Actually, there are all kinds, and each and every one of those, the Clean Air Act, the Fish and Wildlife Coordination Act, they all have some authority and some ability to help us if we had to push it through a regulatory framework to get it done, if we weren't just doing it because it was the right thing. We have a lot of support legally for doing it. Many people ask, like, who should be involved? Who's going to do it? Should it be up to the Federal Highway Administration because we fund highways? Or should the DOT be the lead because they're the ones who actually build these roads, the county roads, the local roads? The question is all of us. It takes your involvement, your caring. Many times, some of the crossings that we saw in Europe existed because children saw dead salamanders. And so they put in a crossing for amphibians. So many times that also happens somewhere in the East where it was actually children riding on a school bus every day, saw roadkill on the way, and they started keeping track of it and brought it to the attention of the state DOT. So it's everybody's concern. The roadblocks today are many times no one knows or understands that we can do a lot of things, that actually there's science out there to support it. In this country, we haven't done a lot of the actual scientific analysis that shows that connectivity works, what you need to do to have it done. But Europe has. And so when we were over there, we brought back 300 different documents, all kind of different species and different discussions. When we get into how and by whom, this presentation was really geared towards a transportation planning type group. At what stage of planning roads should we care about doing this kind of thing? Many people don't get it involved real early on. Are you familiar with what we call the State Transportation Improvement Plan? Do you guys know it? You guys, oh, hey. All right. Well, this type of thing doesn't usually happen. Usually we just say, oh, we need to widen a road to 2 to 4 lanes because of congestion or safety or some other reason. And at that point in time, there's not a lot of thought given to points where we need to worry about animal collisions and that kind of thing. It's just a safety capacity type analysis. Oregon and Washington are actually probably more concerned than other states in the country for fish passage. I think Oregon probably leads Washington a little bit. I can say that because I'm out of Washington right now, but because Washington believes that they do. Money is always a big question. Where are we going to get money to do this? What money can we use to do this? Do we have to have specially earmarked money? Do we have to take money away from safety to do that? That's what we hear from most highway engineers. The answer is almost all what we call federal aid dollars, the dollars that come from the Highway Trust Fund and are divvied out to all the states. Almost any of that money can be used to pay for wildlife connectivity and passage. It's up to the state DOT, and there's a lot of pressure on them today. There's not enough money to build what we need to build for safety and congestion, and so there's a lot of different people pulling at that money. Bike and ped. Should we put in a bicycle path, or should we put in an underpass for deer? You know, where's our priority? Can we build something that works for both? And that kind of weighting is what's going on today. This is just kind of a list of areas where people can get involved, even though it doesn't occur much today. I don't know if we don't have very many recovery plans for endangered species because there's no funding for them. So that's up there, but it really doesn't exist in very many parts of the country. What's the threat of habitat fragmentation? And that's what we were getting into. And we see it all over our country with sprawl and that kind of thing. One of the greatest threats is if we cut off their habitat, either where they breed, where they eat, where they are, we threaten their very existence with our roads. In getting in some of the types and footprints we see this all over the country and what happens. We see the degradation of habitat. We see an increase in road density that segments it. A change in hydrology, that's a big issue today. Stormwater runoff, degradation of the water quality. That's an issue now, and probably more so on the West Coast and in the rest of the U.S., but huge issue, stormwater runoff and the effect on wildlife. And then just everything that happens when we build a road, erosion, sedimentation into creeks and streams. The chemicals, salts, de-icers, what happens to those? How do those affect wildlife? Does the salt attract deer to the roadway? Lots of studies going on that. Noise and how that has actually is what one would almost see as an invisible barrier to birds along the roadway. And then just hazardous material, and there's all kinds of definitions of that. So all of those things are impacting wildlife and are an effect from roads. And what are the results? What do we see happening? Well, they avoid the road. They don't get anywhere near it. Many animals will just stay on one side and never cross. And so what does that do to animal populations? Road mortality, we're all familiar with that. In fact, our tour to Europe was called the Roadkill Tour among the engineers. You're going to go check out all the dead animals in Europe. We like to look at it more as road mortality and roadkill. And then the whole edge effect. I don't know if you've heard much about that, but it's just not the road itself. But depending on the species, depending on the animal, many will stay a certain 100, 200, 300 feet away from the roadway. So it's not just an impact of the existing road, but how far out the noise and that kind of thing affects animals. What has been studied the most are the wide-ranging carnivores, especially in this part of the country, the grizzly, the lynx, the mountain lion. Lots of analysis on how we have segmented their habitat. We've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars and discovered that grizzly bears just don't like to cross our roads. They just don't want to cross. Even in Banff, where they put in all the wildlife crossings, female grizzlies don't use them. So even with the best intent and even putting in the connectivity, we're not seeing it working everywhere. So those are some of the special problems that we see with our roads. The barriers, the fact that animals won't cross them, the fact that we kill them, and the fact that we have to think of the humans. That's a lot of the way that we get these things integrated into road projects is there's a whole lot of human mortality from hitting bears and deers and moose on the road. Okay, in doing our analysis and doing the monitoring, this is kind of a summary of what we found and what we're looking into, and what Europe has actually already found is that the roads are a barrier to movements, that they fragment, and that if we don't look at future development when we're planning corridors and when we're planning crossings, such as we pay $1 million to put in a green bridge and we allow a Walmart on the other side, we've wasted $1 million. And also the public's going to say, they don't work. So we have to do really good integrated planning. Now, how do we know where are the wildlife? How do we know where to put them? There's a whole lot of study that goes into the before and the after on the use. Otherwise, again, you can put all the culverts, passages, and underpasses in, and they're not going to work. One of the methods that's used widely both in the U.S. and in Europe is radio telemetry. We saw this a lot in Europe, these remotely triggered cameras. They were used a lot by the Swiss, and we also saw them in Slovenia. This is a very inexpensive but high maintenance method of finding out if the animals are using the bridges. This was a green bridge under construction in Switzerland, and it was the one that as soon as there was dirt on it, the animals were busy crossing. And the important thing to remember on putting the connectivity in that was repeated over and over again, you have to have habitat on both sides. Without the habitat, you're connecting nothing. And in Europe, all their high-speed roadways, kind of equivalent to our interstates, were fully fenced the whole way for wildlife, without even a thought. Here, it's a very big point of contention. And then the remote videoing. You saw a lot of the pictures in the film that we saw were from the video monitoring. Okay, the results of the monitoring, we see the segmentation going on, but we see if we put the connectivity in the habitat and connect the habitat, they do use it. We found out where the animals are dying, and by finding out where they're dying, that we can find out where to put in some form of connection. One thing that people forget is a lot of people just focus on where you find the dead animals along the roadway. That isn't necessarily the best indicator of where to put a crossing. A lot of times you'll have, and this probably gets rather morbid, but the animals can many times make it many feet off the roadway. So generally when the roads are littered with dead animals. And just because you happen to see a lot of dead animals here, if there's no good habitat, it's not necessarily a good place to put the crossings. Yes, our highways are barriers. No one likes to admit it, but yes, they are in more ways than one. Noise, the obviously physical structure. These are examples of the use of culverts, and these weren't put in just for wildlife. Most of them were put in for water or to allow, sometimes for farm machinery and that kind of thing. But especially in Southern California, in highly densely urban areas, that's the only place that wildlife has to cross. Okay, I was just going to go over, again, some of the things that we saw in Europe, the green bridges and the green passages. We don't have any of those in this country. So they're pretty unique to Europe. Florida is in the process of building one, and Washington, it has one in the works for I-90 where we're widening from 4 to 6 lanes. There is one. You can see we're up on the bridge on a bus. Okay, so you can see that it is multi-used. We were picnicking on this bridge. This bridge, you can see the trees. This bridge was actually put in to preserve historic trees. These trees had great significance to this area. So it really wasn't put in for wildlife. Germany, this presentation doesn't really go from country to country, and it's kind of easier for me to talk about the differences. But in Germany, their environmental law is very similar to ours, doing the environmental analysis before you build the project. But they focus a whole lot on, probably a little more honestly than we do, on if they have to balance economics and the environment. They're a little more open about that than we are. And so they put in 6, this was one of 6 green bridges that were put in. They had no studies that showed that animals were anywhere nearby, that it was really going to connect habitat, even though there was habitat on both sides. But again, this one was really put in for the historic trees. This is another one. There were a variety of designs of these green bridges in Europe. Some were arched, some were flat, some had ponds. Some actually had semi-paved roads on them, some had paths, and some were entirely landscaped. Mostly in Switzerland, they're entirely landscaped. Switzerland did a very good job. This is in Holland. And they emphasized, you can see the wood on the side. That's for noise and light, so that when the animals are crossing, they're not affected by either one. But both the wood fencing and then berming and landscaping were used to accomplish the same task. And it is amazing when you're up on those bridges, you really don't hear a lot of the roadway. One significant thing the Swiss discovered was when a roadway reaches 10,000 ADT a day, it's a total and complete barrier to crossing for animals. And if you think about, most of our interstates are at 100,000, 200,000 a day. So unless we provide some kind of connectivity, they're obviously a complete barrier to wildlife. This is an example of an arched bridge. This one most clearly shows the connectivity of the habitat. The Swiss actually pick plants to attract certain animals, birds, butterflies. And many times when they just build a bridge, they'll put certain scents on it too, so the animals feel comfortable crossing it. So they go to great lengths to ensure that they actually are used. They will also buy, in cases where they're going to put a green bridge in and they have farmland like this on either side, so it's not really good habitat for the animals, they'll negotiate with the farmers and buy a strip of land and landscape it and put in ponds and everything. So they will create the connectivity where it doesn't exist. This is the new highway that was built in Germany, and you can see two of the green bridges, and they were spaced kind of like that down the highway with about that spacing. You can see the top one really is connecting habitat, which is important. You can see the fencing. The one down here is kind of a classic reason some things occur in road building. Very wealthy landowner wanted to get his farm equipment from one side of the road to the other. So that's where this green bridge was located. But it still functions. But you can see it doesn't have the good habitat. It really wasn't, it doesn't have everything it really should have. And this is one of the Swiss bridges. You can see it's bermed, it has the landscaping, it has the habitat, and it has the fencing. So it has the three things that are really critical for connectivity. This pond is actually on top of the bridge, so that when the amphibians are coming across, they can get water, and so that it makes their passage better. And this is a classic green bridge in Switzerland. It has the fencing, but it has the berming, it has the varied plants. They found that wherever there is a green bridge, that's where the birds choose to fly over the roads. You don't see them flying anywhere else but where there's a green bridge. So there's some amazing research done by the Swiss. Culverts and pipes, we were just looking at ones in Europe that were specifically designed for animal passage. Important to note, only Slovenia has a large carnivore today, no other country in Europe. The brown bear is the only large carnivore left on the European continent. Fascinating. And they have a little roe deer in many of the countries like Switzerland and Germany. And Italy, they're trying to introduce the brown bear into Italy by connecting habitat. But they have done a very good job of decimating their wildlife in Europe. Though they pointed out to us endlessly that they may have decimated, they took 5,000 years to decimate it. We have done it on the road in 200 years. So they're saying who's worse, us or you, So don't be so proud of yourself just because you still have some carnivores. This is an example of an amphibian crossing that was put in. They put very specific fencing in. They changed the gauge so it's larger at the top, smaller at the bottom, and bury it so that they can ensure that the animals do use the passages. Only Germany doesn't bury the fencing. It's against the law there. I don't know why, but... And there's all kinds of different ways that they were getting the salamanders to go. This happens to be a very expensive one. It's concrete, very expensive to build. This was in Holland. It was retrofitted canal, very heavily used by... In Holland, there are only two animals left, the hedgehog and the badger. The badger is like the animal of the Netherlands. Well, maybe they sneak in and out, but that's what they were telling us, that they have very few hedgehogs and badgers. I guess that's the nice thing about being born. You know, you could be in Germany one day and Holland the next. This is just an example of a pipe. They found that many times that fox or smaller animal will use it, and once the scent is in there, other animals won't. And this is an example of one. Since a fox used it, no other critter is interested. This, again, is at a retrofitted canal in the Netherlands. This was kind of interesting. This had been a 2-lane road in the Netherlands, and they have habitat on either side, and it was a very low usage. It was just a horse farm. So they took out one lane. They put up kind of a silt fence to block the light from the road, and they just put stumps in there. And Netherlands has kind of pushed this idea that you don't really need to spend a whole lot of money to create habitat. So they just put a lot of stumps here so the animals would have something to go to. And they didn't landscape it. They just put the stumps in. Well, the neighbors thought it was a trash pit, and they're throwing their garbage, you know, and they think it's totally worthless. And so they actually had to put a sign up and say, you know, we're connecting habitat, you know, be proud of it. And so the neighbors cleaned it all up, and now they're very proud of it, and they take care of it. But that's used instead of paving underneath viaducts. They're putting those stumps in various places all over Europe, and it's a very inexpensive method of connecting habitat. You saw this in the video. This is in Slovenia. This was just it's just a low utilized or farm road. And it has the electric fencing, very expensive, because the brown bears were just pushing down the fences. But it's utilized. They have the sand pads or whatever on either side, and they saw that 15 different types of animals were utilizing this just because it had the habitat on either side fenced, and it was a safe place to cross the road. This is a viaduct on a brand new highway in Slovenia. How many people know where Slovenia is or even know what Slovenia is? None of us knew when we were over there. We had to get on the maps because the time we were over there had been a country for 9 years, and they joked that they had their 2-week war because every country that broke apart from Yugoslavia had to go to war. Slovenia was the wealthiest of all the countries that broke off from Yugoslavia, so they didn't want a war. They wanted an economy intact. And at the time, 9 years ago, they had lots of good transit. Well, they want to be more like the U.S. now, so they're building highways, and they're letting their transit go. So I know that you guys would appreciate that, and transit capital of the U.S., I think, here in Portland. But when they were building this new highway, this was just completed, this was going to be an entire earth fill. And they actually had an environmental protest here. They had protesters out with signs and everything. The protesters and the hunters, the environmentalists and the hunters, actually hold hands in Slovenia because they both want the same thing. They both want an increase in the brown bear population. Hunters for one reason, environmentalists for the other. And also, fascinatingly enough, in Slovenia, the brown bear is listed as endangered and hunted. If they can get the population up to a certain point, they allow it to be hunted. And then if it isn't, then no one can hunt. So they've actually formed a rather fascinating partnership in Slovenia. Anyway, instead of putting a fill, they put in this large viaduct, made the hunters happy, the environmentalists happy, and actually, for hydraulic purposes, it works a lot better also. So it was quite an interesting partnership. This is a viaduct that was put in Switzerland. The Swiss wanted to show us the good, the bad, and the ugly. This was the ugly. They spent all this money putting the viaduct in. You can see the stumps that they put down so the little critters could feel comfortable crossing. And what this doesn't show, and they actually connected a nice culvert for them to make it through this other local road, and then they put their equivalent of a Walmart on the other side. And they said, so they had invested all this money but didn't maintain the land use. And that's the thing that is so critical in this country, because we don't have the national land use laws like Germany has a national land use law, and so they have much better control over connectivity than we do. So that's a huge factor here, and turned out to be a large factor in Switzerland. This is an example of a amphibian crossing that doesn't work. Again, in Switzerland, there's a lip to it, and so what happens when the little critters finally make it in, they fall in, they get all disoriented, and they go the wrong way. And they said they had to kind of redesign and rethink, but at least they were concerned about them. This is a look at it. And they come in, they kind of fall in, they get going the wrong way. They have to make it there, to make it under the road, and so a lot of them never get anywhere. They just spend their life swirling around in the crossing. This one's in Germany. This is one I was telling you about where the school kids saw a lot of salamanders dying. It's a very low used road. There's only a few farm vehicles, but a lot of salamanders are getting killed. So they put in this very expensive crossing here, the concrete to guide them. You can see it's right along the highway. There's the fencing. So there's a lot more emphasis on smaller critters in Europe than there is here. We saw a variety of fencing for different uses. This, again, is fencing that was used to keep mostly light off the overpass. We saw this when we were in Banff. I don't know, have very many of you been to Banff? In Banff, they've extensively fenced the highway, and they do have overcrossings, but sometimes the deer do get on the road. And this is an escape ramp for them to get back off safely. So the fencing goes to that edge, they can get off, and they jump, and so that's the only place where we saw an actual place where they could escape. We were joking, this is in the Netherlands. If the animal's smart enough, it can get through here if Ray isn't holding it open, but that's also designed to be an escape ramp for animals. This shows the different gauging in the fence for the smaller critters so that they don't get through and get killed. It's an example of electrified fencing in Slovenia. It's another example, another way to do fencing. It's probably this is the low-budget fencing they do in France. This fence had a little lip on it. It was trying to accomplish the same thing of keeping the smaller animals off the highways. This is a brand new overcrossing with all the fencing in Switzerland. Again, Switzerland, the fencing connecting to a brand new green bridge. More fencing. I think that might be it. Nope. This was in, God, I pushed the button too much. What we just went back through was in Canada. They actually electrified that gate to keep the grizzlies out of the ski area. That's okay. Oh, it's not okay. Which was kind of interesting. They had electrified the fence and then also electrified what they call the Texas gate so the bears wouldn't enter the ski area. It was becoming quite controversial in Canada. The conflict between skiers and bears was unacceptable. So they actually entirely fenced the ski area to keep the grizzlies out. That's okay. And then signage is probably the biggest question mark in all wildlife, that it really doesn't work. Our joke is you put it up and then the hunters know where to go hunting, because that's about as effective as it is. In the Netherlands, they actually have these signs. There's very little natural habitat left in the Netherlands, but wherever it is, there is a sign like this that lets people know they're in an area where they're trying to make it safer for animals, so they lower the speed 10 kilometers. This was a sign on that one area that I showed you that helped the neighbors recognize that it was actually for animal preservation. This is the only sign that we've seen anywhere that actually works. It's in Switzerland. It's on you can see the road that it's next to. And when there is a deer in the area, a small roe deer, the sign lights up, lowers the speed, the kilometers, I think, from 50 to 40, and it's been 100% effective. There's been no deer kill since this sign was put in place. But it's the only sign that, in all the studies that people have done on sign, that actually works. The study that we did looked at, you saw the Florida in the video, the panther. Banff, we talked about a little bit. Montana, actually, the case study there is Highway 93. It isn't built yet. It goes through an Indian reservation. They're going to put in 43 wildlife crossings, the most of any highway in the U.S. Some of them are already existing. They're culverts for water, but they're going to be retrofitted for wildlife also. So the study in Montana is the one that's being most touted in the U.S. Okay, so in conclusion, we need to increase awareness, so we go out and talk to you guys so that you know what's going on. that there are opportunities, mostly if you start early and know that there is funding to do this kind of thing. We need to identify research needs. We have money. Federal Highways has money. There are pots of money to do this kind of research in the DOT. It's just a lot of people don't know it's there and don't take advantage of it. Almost all highway money can be used to do this type of thing. It's not special pots of money. We do need more training, and we need people to care. This is an example of an underpass in Banff. And that's just the summary of our synopsis. So that's the final slide. So if there are any questions on, yes?
It's so awkward. I didn't know anything about this topic before today, so I just want to thank you for coming and talking to us about it. It's great. I was wondering if you could go into a little bit. You mentioned a green bridge in Florida and then one in Washington along I-90. If you could talk a little bit about those projects, if they're demonstration projects, or how those decisions came about to do that, and then how that lessons from that could be applied to other projects in the States.
Okay, the Florida and Washington projects are not constructed yet. Florida is under construction, and it has habitat on either side, but it was really designed, back to your point, more as a bike and ped connectivity. But it is landscaped so that it will function for wildlife. But it's getting built and funded because of the bike and ped connectivity that's offering. So that was the number one criteria that allowed the Florida one. Florida is on the leading edge on doing this kind of thing. They have in place, through working with, I think, University of Florida, 400 different GIS layers. And so when they do a project and they're in planning and we want to widen a road or put in a new road, they'll just layer on endangered species, all the different things, so that they can design a road to hopefully avoid and minimize the impacts, and then they know where to put passages. So for Florida, it's easier than most of the rest of us trying to do highway projects. In Washington, again, it's in the planning phases. Right now we're writing the environmental document. I-90 in this one's at Snoqualmie Pass. We're going to widen it from 4 lanes to 8 lanes. So we need space for cars now. Come on, I can't believe you guys are so appalled. And and we're going to put in all kinds of wildlife crossings. It's been a great partnership, both public and private. There's a private group, and I don't remember their name, but they bought all kinds of land, donated to the Forest Service. So wherever there's a critical passage point, they're preserving the habitat, which is very vital. So they're buying out private in-holdings within the forest. And then the Forest Service, the DOT, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, NOAA Fisheries. It's a huge group that's gotten together and are picking spots, important spots to put them. The Green Bridge happens to be just by the topography a perfect location. So you can just kind of connect either side, and it's a very narrow area where wildlife are known to want to cross, I'll put it that way. So again, it's in the planning phases. So we don't actually have anything built. Now there is, and I shouldn't say there are no, somewhere, I think it's New Hampshire has one, and they built it 20 years ago for deer. And now the neighbors hate it because at that time it was a refuge on both sides. But now sprawl has come and surrounded it, and the deer that make use of the Green Bridge are eating the roses and just irritating the humans. So it's now quite unpopular back there. Do you have a question?
I was wondering where in Washington that was, how far east of Seattle it was geographically.
Do you know where the ski areas, Snoqualmie Pass ski areas are? No?
It's up the pass over the Cascades.
Yeah, it's about, I'm trying to think, it's probably 40, no, not that far. It's not that far. It's fairly close to Seattle, actually. Say 30 miles. I don't know the exact. I can't believe you question the need for widening highways. Well, a lot of it is there's intense truck traffic, so there's a lot of safety requirements, and I don't know all the analysis on why. But it goes from 4 to 2, to 3 to 2. You know, it narrows down, and I don't know. I know they've done their analysis, and it's entirely justified that way.
Is there an attempt by the FHA to increase the extent that habitat connectivity is addressed in environmental impact statements from studies from new construction?
For brand new road construction?
New or additional, expansion to highways.
The woman you saw on the video, Cindy Burbank, she is the top, she's our head of planning and environment for Federal Highways. Federal Highways has a policy to enhance and protect the environment. It is written within our policy. The problem, the little minor problem is that we have 50 division offices. Okay, so each state has their own office. Your office is in Salem, Washington's is in Olympia. They're mostly in the capitals. And there's inconsistencies in the knowledge of the staff, just like there is in any lovely government bureaucracy. So we are making an attempt. It is a priority. We're trying to educate that it's not just where there are endangered species, that it's wildlife in general that we're concerned about. So yes, it is definitely an intense effort on our part to try and get more awareness. Definitely. Hopefully we're making a dent. Yes.
You said that there's federal funding available for this, and I was just wondering if it's additive money. I used to work at an agency that was doing projects that would be related to highways, and I know that this would be something that people would get excited about, but their entire project budget was already spoken for, and anything that would cost additional money to build was just out of the question, unless you were able to get some additive grant funding for it. And I don't know if that makes any sense, but is the money that's available, can that be to build on a project that's already planned, or does it just have to be part of the project to begin with?
Excellent question, and there are many embedded in that. One is that we're trying to work in partnership with a lot of other agencies, because it's like the Forest Service on I-90, working with them, not that they're going to bring very much money, but they bring lots of expertise. Same with U.S. Fish and Wildlife and NOAA Fisheries. In a state, there's federal aid dollars and there's state dollars. So there's state and federal combined, plus there's county dollars. And I don't think in the past we've done a good enough effort coordinating with all those things. It's very difficult to do. And that's why I said get involved early in the planning phases, because what you said is exactly what happens. That people say, for example, I have $1 million to do this project, period. And they made that decision way back in the STIP. At what point in time they hadn't really done their environmental analysis, and they don't really know what type of mitigation they're going to need. So by the time they get through their environmental process and they discover, oh, whoops, we have salmon in the creek, and we have lynx crossing the highway, and oh, darn, we have grizzly bears in the area, but all the money's spoken for. Actually, legally, you can't say that. Legally, if you are doing an environmental assessment on a highway with endangered species, you must mitigate. I mean, you can't just go, oh, I don't have any money, oh, darn it. But you get away with that with other species and other animals that don't have any protection, and that's why it's so critical to get involved early on. And there are lots of efforts, it's just they are not, it's so hard to get, there's so little time in the day, all they're doing is downsizing, because you know that we're worthless as government bureaucrats. Just ask, oop, I better be careful, this is being filmed. Anyway, so they're just busy downsizing government, and so it makes it increasingly difficult to keep the links there. And so somehow Europe has a really good network. They network very well. They're smaller though. And so the information gets out better. And we're trying to do that here, create the links, create the networks. We do have certain websites. I don't know if you're familiar with the Center for Transportation and Environment in North Carolina, CTE. We put all 300 documents that we got from Europe on their website. And they have this document. They have a summary of the class that we gave in Banff on wildlife crossings. They're an excellent resource for more information. So we're trying to link to all the websites. So if you go to our website, we have a critter crossing website at Federal Highways. It links to everybody else's websites. So we're trying to get people talking and hearing. I don't know, it's a tough job, though, because there's fewer and fewer people doing it. And there's much less emphasis on it right now, also. Yes?
From what I understand, the gas taxes in Europe are much higher than the U.S. I mean, that is, the cost of gasoline is the same in the U.S., but they add a lot more tax, and they use that money, again, for highways and railroad construction. What I'm wondering is, since Europe has a higher density and presumably a much higher traffic volume, that presumably when they put in these projects, it's not only a higher priority to put in wildlife crossings and such, but they actually have the money to do it and the wherewithal to do it, since they do a lot of tunneling as well. What I'm wondering is, when you try to do it in the U.S., do you have the same justifications of traffic volume? And are costs very similar, or are they generally higher in the U.S. for doing similar projects? And what are the costs in general?
Do you always ask 10 questions within one? Actually, I don't know the difference in the taxes in the different countries. For example, France, all the gas money goes into the general fund, and then it's distributed for whatever they want. So even if it's higher, it's used for a variety of different things. And I don't know how the other countries are taxed. Probably a huge difference between the U.S. and Europe is that I'd probably just say, they just do it. You know, we're building a highway. We've already done so much crap to the whole environment that we need to do everything we can to protect it. Here, LA is a fascinating comparison because, I probably find it way too amusing, but they're doing all these studies because, really there's really no habitat left, for example, in Los Angeles. But some of these pictures were from Los Angeles. I worked on a large toll road in Los Angeles, one of the last, quote, natural environments in Southern California. And they went to great extreme to connect the habitat for what was left. But there's so few critters left, And so in Europe, I think that's where they're at, is there's so few left. The cost, it depends. A lot of the cost here in the U.S. for road projects is right-of-way. Actually, acquiring the land is very expensive today. Many times it will cost more than actually the construction cost itself. Lawsuits are very expensive. Environmental delays are very expensive. There's a lot of things that are very expensive. All those green bridges that you saw in Europe, the average cost was $1 million. $1 million, many of our highway projects are $20 and $100 million. A lot of the highway projects proposed in Washington are, the one I'm working on in downtown Seattle is $4.5 billion. And so when you're looking at numbers like that, what's $1 million? Now, it's probably heresy in the world of highways, but it's value system. Do you value this? Do you want it for the future? Do you want it for your children? Do you want fish for them? Do you want to see grizzly bears still roaming free? And that's what isn't quite so embedded in the thought process of the people in the U.S. building roads. And that's, I think, where we've lost the connection. We still think we have so much. We still think that we haven't lost enough yet. And I don't know why we have to get to total destruction before we go, whoops, let's save a few things. Yes?
I just wanted to say, you're saying, you make it sound like it's our cars that are making all the grizzly bears extinct and whatnot. And I don't think that it's the cars that are wiping out all these species. And I'm wondering, the predators, don't they just use these tunnels to catch their prey, It only makes sense to me. And how do they funnel them all through there? What keeps them, like this one, it might have a fence, but for how many miles until the next crossing? How do these animals know to go there? And then plus, once a Wait.
The 10 questions in one question I'll never remember. Let me answer some of them and then you can keep going, but I'll never remember all 10 questions. Okay, number one, cars are not the only killer of grizzly bears. No. But my presentation is on the effects of highways on grizzlies. Yes, there are other killers. There are railroads. There are, lack of food, loss of habitat. There are other factors affecting grizzly habitat. But I'm just focusing on cars. You're absolutely right. They are not the only thing that is resulting in death to grizzlies. See, that was question one. See, now I've completely lost all your other questions. So you have to sequence them in here. What was your other one?
My other one was...
Oh, I know, fencing and how do you get them in here. For example, this is the Banff Highway. It is entirely fenced. The whole highway is fenced. And so the fencing, the only place where critters can cross is where there are underpasses like this or culverts. So the entire highway, all the way along the Banff Highway, is fenced. And that is a major factor, and it's a very good point, because how else do you get the critters to use them? And it's a big point in highways in the United States. For example, Snoqualmie Pass, it's really, with the snowfall normally on the pass at 10 to 12 feet, you can't put up normal fences, and fencing isn't going to work. And so how else are we going to get the critters to use all these underpasses that we're putting in the highway? So your point is well taken. You have to have a way to direct them in.
And then what about the grizzly bear that's not that wide. If one grizzly bear decides that's his territory, there's not going to be any deer using that path. So.
Okay, your predator question, that's right. You're right. I mean, we were laughing. It isn't really funny, but the ones that we worked on in Southern California, which were designed for the deer, okay, to get them from one side of the highway to the other, mountain lions instantly were there. They figured out, woohoo, dinner, this is really great. There's really nothing we can do about that. I mean, that's a fact of nature. If there's only one underpass and the mountain lions figure it out and they're not stupid, that lunch is that readily available, it does happen. There's no question that does happen.
And then it does.
I have some data from a highway here in Oregon that passes through a forest corridor where the forest comes right up to the side of the road. It's Highway 18 to the coast. And so we sort of know the numbers of roadkill because they have a patrol out there for incidents. And I'm just wondering if in the European documents, if they talk about kind of a point at which a crossing becomes necessary.
Oh, darn it. Here. Oh, okay. We're as concerned as we are about, we want to put in, make sure it's utilized, it has to be cost effective and that kind of thing. And again, the utilization is based on the location, the habitat. And so if you know you're getting a lot of deer kill there, a lot of times it's not the fact that we're killing. Particularly now, there are people that refer to deer as rats. There are certain people that feel the deer population is completely out of control, and why do we care? Especially in some states like Wisconsin and others where they're overrun with deer. So the priority tends to be where we're having a lot of deer kill is human. Because generally, if you hit a deer with your car, you are dead. And it's not just because of the, I won't get totally morbid. I'll just go ahead for the morbid side of you all. It's the fact that many times they go over the car, come in, and it's all the disease within the deer that kills you. And so that's why you don't, all the blood splatters all over you, and at the hospital, all these weird, awful things. It's really pretty disgusting. But so that's the driver for areas where there's a lot of roadkill. It's more the worry of the human and not the deer.
I'm wondering, because you talk about the need to have this sort of embedded in from the beginning and early on, and I'm wondering and I don't know if you'll have the answer to this, but either how much this is discussed in transportation engineering programs in terms of educating people, or if that's part of FHWA or who's ever part of your outreach effort is to get into curriculum. And I don't know if Rob has any anecdote or knows, because he's our transportation engineering professor, whether you've seen this integrated into curriculum in any way.
Well, in my engineering program, it wasn't integrated in at all. It's rare. It's almost non-existent in the engineering program. It is a major failure because you get out very well trained on the standards of building your highways, and you know how to keep them straight, and you know how to get from point A to point B, and don't put those curves in because they're too scary and people die, and it's all very well and nicely embedded. However, now we're pushing context-sensitive solutions and blending with our communities and the whole environment. And I think it's a huge weak link. And Montana State, for example, because Montana Transportation Institute is right there, they are doing it more. So in different parts of the country, but not enough. I don't think anywhere near enough for the awareness to be there. It's a very good point. So we are trying hard to get the word out and to work with others. And it's a big interest of federal highways. Because if the information's out, again, early, you understand it. You just don't want to make the road, with 12-foot lanes, 11-foot shoulders. Don't forget you take care of the runoff. The stormwater's good. There's also animals on either side, to integrate that aspect. So we're working on it, but we're not very far. Yes.
I was wondering if the National Park Service has looked at these types of wildlife crossings. It seems like a natural to me, mainly because it is preserved habitat area. We have serious transportation congestion issues, yet no money or really political will to expand the roads in these areas. And it also seems like a good place to put them because it's a place where tourists go and it could really be a showcase where people see these things.
Okay, you have excellent questions here. Dr. Ray Savageau, or as we call him Ray, he likes to be Dr. Ray Savageau. He actually works he's an adjunct professor at UCLA in Northridge University in California. He's with the Santa Monica Park. He's with the National Park Service. He was on our international scan tour. He is the only person in the Park Service that is looking at this. He is the Park Service person. And in LA, they're actually, the Park Service is working with the state DOT to have a green bridge that goes over. That is one. I forgot that one. That's going to go over, I think it's Highway 101, and connect some of the last habitat within the park to a refuge site. So it is recognized. But you know who builds most of the roads in the parks? Do you know? Federal Highways. We have 3 offices that are called Direct Federal or Federal Lands, and in the parks, the major roads in the national parks, not the logging roads in those in the forests, or the minor, what are termed minor roads. All the other ones are built by Federal Highways, and so we're trying very hard, and there is awareness within Federal Highways when the new roads are put in to try and make sure that we incorporate that. So it's actually incumbent on us to work. And as a matter of fact, I'm giving a presentation to the National Park Service in March on all of this because many of them aren't aware of these alternatives that they have. So we're working to more cooperatively, or hopefully are. Oh, he didn't ask a question.
Are there any examples of roads, primary roads, from national parks or large areas of wildlife?
What a lovely controversial question you've asked. There's actually an interchange being taken out in LA and converted to a wildlife crossing, which is amazing in the large metropolitan area of LA. There are areas in Idaho where they are, but it is hugely controversial because of four-wheel drive recreational users, very unhappy with that. But a lot of times where the roads wash out due to floods and that kind of thing, many of the roads, as you're aware, it's easiest to build a road by a stream and that's where most of the roads are built in the forest. If they're washed out during a flood and there are bull trout or chinook or some endangered species in the creek, many times we will not replace those roads, or it becomes a battle of the wills. I'm sure you guys heard about in Nevada the shovel brigade and that whole battle on a creek. There was a road that was washed out in Nevada, and I can't remember what forest it was on, but they said they weren't going to put it back in because bull trout, critical habitat, weren't going to put it back in. Well, this is politically inflammatory, but I'll just go ahead and say it. The rednecks there, well, you know, it's my road. We've had it for, 70 years, and we're going to put it back, and you can't take it away from us. And the Forest Service hung tough and said, there are species, we do care, we're not putting it back. Well, hundreds of people came with their shovel. The road was to take all the material that the Forest Service had put in to block the road out so they could open the road because it was theirs and they were going to take it back and no one was their right. And that kind of thing is where the education has to come, the understanding that there has to be a balance, that yes, there are a lot of roads for you, but we do want to have bull trout in the stream. And so that's probably the best example locally of conflict with what you're talking about.
Questions, not 10?
I just don't keep a good memory of
them. Not really related. One of them is connected to what Teresa was asking before. It seems to me that enhancement funds could be used for things like this. And enhancement funds are limited, but are there efforts that you know of to make funding available in the next reauthorization? That's question one. And then are there efforts that you know of to create what I would call course materials, either through NHI or something like that related to this? Because most textbooks, no textbooks even have the term context-sensitive design in them, because textbooks were written, most of the ones that are out there now were initially written probably 20, 30 years ago, and they've just been updated. And, there's no new good engineering textbook out there, but course materials would be great.
Okay, I can remember these questions, but catch me if I forget. Enhancement funds, there are 13 different categories that they can be used for. Most people are familiar with bike and ped. That's what the majority in historic. Wildlife crossings was added in T21, very specifically for this purpose. However, we don't have even one example nationally of it ever being used that way, because each state is given the ability, each DOT, enhancement funds are 10% of the STP funds, which are the surface transportation, is one pot within the money that the DOT gets. And each DOT decides how they're going to distribute it, who gets it, and that kind of thing. I don't know how each state does it differently. I don't know how it's done in Oregon. But generally, the populace, the priority starts with bike and ped, then a few historic buildings are saved, and then a few other things happen. But the ability's there. The Defenders of Wildlife and has a whole coalition. If you go Defenders of Wildlife, probably .com or whatever it is, they are working very hard to change. Actually, I gave them a sentence in T21 where it says, on all road projects based on T21, we have to consider bike and ped facilities, no matter what it is, even if it's a repaving, an overlay, or whatever. I said, all you need to do is add wildlife, and no one reads, no one will see it, and you've accomplished your task. And it's that simple. And I don't know if they'll succeed in doing that, but they're trying very hard to get, instead of having to go to earmarking like that no one uses, what people forget is you can say, well, you have to consider bike and ped on all transportation facilities. Well, okay, we've considered it. We don't want them. Okay, we're going to go ahead and do what we want to do. Unless it's an absolute requirement, and federal highways has stepped so far back from requiring anything absolutely that it's become increasingly difficult to have that occur in anything consistent nationally. And your second question, see, I knew I'd forget. Course materials. There's currently a website, and I will get it to you, that was started by the Forest Service that we're enhancing, that you can go to and say you're concerned about deer. And you type in deer, and it will bring up 10 different deer crossings, under, over. the design, the cost, the contact, why it was put in, all those kinds of things. And the person who was most involved in developing it, her name's Sandy Jacobson. She's with the Forest Service. She has a course on this that she's giving to Forest Service and other DOT personnel. Two of us, a colleague of mine and myself, are trying to put together a wildlife course that isn't just for little tiny Forest Service roads, but it's for more, I wouldn't say normal roads, but wider roads. So we are working on it right now. We don't have much funding. That's always the biggest factor. And we're also, there's $250,000 being spent this year to put together an NHI course that's dealing more with water and roads. So that will get with fish passage, but not so much with wildlife passage. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned that a private environmental organization had purchased the habitat on either side of I-90. Because the highways are under your jurisdiction, if an environmental group wanted to pay for an underpass or something, would they be allowed to build it if they paid for it?
Yeah.
Could they get approval from you to do it? Or?
Fascinating question. Disney, for example, has wanted interchanges and has paid for them. Right in the fine state of Washington, who wanted an interchange and paid for it? I can't remember. Well, Bill could easily afford it. It'd be nothing. We should have Bill Gates buy a green bridge for all of us. But Weyerhaeuser. We willingly accept money from, if you want to donate to the cause. No one's ever turned it down. The catch is that it has to be built to standards. Many times when you're retrofitting, like if you say you wanted an underpass under I-5, for example, and there's nothing there, the disruption to traffic, if there was going to be a huge traffic disruption due to that, you probably wouldn't get very much support. An overpass, a green bridge, that doesn't interfere with traffic and all that kind of thing, I don't see where I think people would be thrilled if somebody wanted to throw money our way. Very rarely does anybody volunteer money. And in today's budget crisis, it's being left behind, those kinds of concerns. Okay, how many questions do you have?
Is that part of the problem, though? That why would you even need one if traffic wasn't a problem?
What do you mean?
The overpass? You said it would be a big deal if traffic was a problem, but not a big deal if traffic wasn't a problem.
So interrupting traffic. For example, if you could put the overpass over the bridge and not interrupt traffic flow, construction projects are a huge issue because they're a safety concern, and they're also the public hates. They hate them while they're going on. They only like them when they're through. And generally, in today's world, when we're through, we need to do something else. We never quite get there with enough space or room. So it's more just interruption than the traffic itself.
It seems that one of the inherent problems you're going to run into with an underpass from pollution, either be it petroleum or what other products you're having. I was wondering if you saw any examples in Europe of them either trying to collect the pollution runoff or diffuse the pollution that's going to naturally gather there at the bottom of the underpass.
Good question. Stormwater runoff is probably one of the largest concerns. So, Herr Professor back there, I'm sure your students will be well trained in what to do with all the stormwater runoff because it's a major concern. Ideally, what happens when is that the water just doesn't. We don't design bridges very often anymore. Well, we do. A better designed bridge is one in which the stormwater doesn't run off the edges, doesn't come through holes at the bottom, but goes all the way off and is directed towards a sediment pond. Okay, and so you don't have the runoff in the area where the wildlife are crossing. The problem is sediment ponds are large. West Nile virus is now everyone's saying that the ponds are building and we're creating health hazards. If they aren't maintained, they don't work, on. But we do try to direct the runoff away from like streams and creeks and all of that until at least it's filtered through. So but if we don't do that and it does run off, then you're absolutely right.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.